Hey folks, Eric here at Avid, and I'm going to do kind of a combo quick tip and explainer for you today. And it's going to be on plasma probing. And at the beginning of every plasma cut and every time your torch pierces into the material, the Z height needs to be measured. And that needs to happen because this torch tip needs to be a very specific amount above your metal to maintain a good arc. This is not to be confused with torch height control, which will alter the Z height as the cut is going on. That will be in a different video. Here, we're just talking about at the beginning of a cut when the Z height is read and whenever there's a pierce. Now, there are two methods that this can be read. One is called ohmic probing, and that is when the tip of the torch will come down and touch off the material like this. And it's a ground path that's created between the torch tip and your grounding clamp, and that is read by the controller. And this is a pretty common way of doing this, and it is a good method because it can work for very, very thin metals all the way up to very, very thick metals. And because it takes very, very little force to make that electrical connection in here, that's why it works really well for the thin stuff. The disadvantage of ohmic sometimes is that if you get water or other junk in the torch tip, or the torch tip gets very dirty because you either haven't cleaned it or it just got dirty as you're cutting, sometimes you can come down and touch the metal and it won't read. And in that case, the Z-axis will keep coming down and it can actually knock your torch off or knock it at an angle and mess up the rest of your cut. The other method of measuring the Z height is through what's called a float switch. And that is this right here. So it's a spring-loaded switch. There's a big switch right behind your torch here. And when this is compressed, it's read by the controller. Now, you can come down on a thick piece of metal like this and do a float measurement, and it won't deflect or bend this metal because it's really thick. The float does not work well or at all on thin metals because the spring rate is pretty strong and can deflect or bend those metals. So in our old controllers, you had to choose ahead of time which system you wanted to use. You can either use the ohmic or you could use the float. And these new Plasma EX controllers, you actually get to use both at the same time. And this is really great because if you're in the middle of a job, and let's say you started with ohmic probing, and then you hit maybe a rusty spot of the metal, or you get some junk in the tip and the ohmic is not working, well, it will come down and it will realize that it can't use the ohmic probe and it will use the float instead, and it knows the offset between the ohmic and the float. I'd like to show you how that works right now. Okay, so the first probe you saw was an ohmic probe, and what I'm going to do is simulate the ohmic not working, and I'm going to do that by just unplugging it. So we're getting no ohmic reading at all to the controller, and I'm going to go ahead and do a touch off, and watch what happens. So the torch tip hits, but then this spring reads as well. So we still got a reliable touch off even without our ohmic working. And this only works properly if this is calibrated. Now, if you're new to Plasma EX or you just first set up one, you've probably seen this message that reminds you to do this. And I'm going to show you right now how to run the calibration utility to get this measurement. So before we jump into CNC 12 to set this up, what you want to make sure you have is a thick enough piece of metal on your plate that's clean. You want it grounded really well. You don't want something thin like 16 gauge or something that's going to be really springy. You want to make sure it doesn't rock back and forth at all. And something that's important to check too is to make sure your ohmic is working before you start this test. And it's really simple to do that. You can go in and you can just touch your grounding clamp right to your ohmic tip like this. And if you see that ohmic light up on your control, which I'll show you in a second, you know that your ohmic tip is working. You can also check the float switch too by just compressing it with your hand. And if you see float light up in your control, you know that's working as well. Okay, here we are in CNC 12. And just so you can see what those lights look like when I'm triggering the ohmic light here, this is me touching the grounding clip against the tip. You can see that light up right here. And same thing with float. If I trigger the float, that's triggering right there. So you can make sure those are working ahead of time. Then when you're ready to set up the utility, all you need to do is go into the utils button right here. And one of the first options is number 1, calibrate ohmic and float offset. So we'll just press 1 and hit cycle start. It says place a piece of flat metal under the torch. The metal needs to be thick enough that it won't deflect under pressure of the float switch. Make sure the torch is about 1 inch above the material. Press cycle start to probe. And so it's going to come down and it's going to hit the metal, and then it's going to go ahead and activate that float switch a couple times. And there you go. So it said your float switch and ohmic offset distance has been calibrated. The offset is 0.055 of an inch. Okay, and that's how you calibrate your float and ohmic offset. This is not something you need to do all the time, but if you have a significant change with your z-axis, let's say you knock your torch off or you're running a completely different tip, doesn't really hurt to do this. The number that you're looking for is somewhere between 0.05 and 0.08, roughly. Every machine is a little bit different. You just don't want to see something like a whole inch or some wildly crazy number, because if you do, you might want to check that everything mechanically is okay with your machine. As always, if you have any tips you want to see, plasma or otherwise, hit us up on social, post in our forum. We love hearing from you guys and love making these videos, especially when you guys ask us to do them. Thank you very much and happy cutting.